Okay, good morning, everyone. We're going to start from the top of Lamed Beis, Amud Aleph at the Mishnah. A new parak, fourth parak of Sanhedrin. Echad Dinei Mamnos. So the Mishnah is going to now compare and contrast Dinei Mamnos and Dinei Nefashos. So it says Echad Dinei Mamnos, the Echad Dinei Nefashos, whether it be Dinei Mamnos or Dinei Nefashos, B'Drisha v'Chakira. The halacha of Drisha and Chakira, which is the analysis, the questioning of the Eidim, is similar for both Dinei Mamanos and Dinei Nefashos. Now, although the Mishnah says that they're similar, the Mishnah is actually going to list off a number of distinctions between Dinei Mamanos and Dinei Nefashos. So Drisha and Chakira are two different lines of questioning that we have for the Eidim. One of the Chakira is typically, the Mishnayos later on are going to discuss, Chakira is the general questions we ask them about the time and place, just to establish some of the facts about the events. Drisha is some more specific questions pertaining to that particular type of event. So that's Drisha and Chakira, different types of questions, the analysis and the questioning of the Eidim. So how do we know that Dinei Mamanos and Dinei Nefashos both have this halacha of Drisha and Chakira? Shenemar mishpat echad yiheh lachem. If you look at Rashi for a second, the second Rashi on the page, Rashi says Drisha Chakira. Chakira is the Drisha, the Chakira, the questions that we ask the Eidim, Shechokrin as the Eidim, Shenemar. How do we know this? Where do we know this halacha from? It says Mishpat Echad Yeh Lachem. It says that they have one when discussing the types, capital cases or monetary cases. It says Mishpat Echad Yeh Lachem. They should have one law. V'dinei nefashos, and by dinei nefashos we find it says v'darashta v'chakarta. It says that you have to ask and question the witnesses, and it compares dinei nefashos to dinei mamnos. So therefore, we see that by both of them you require this halacha of drisha and chakira. Now the Mishnah says ma bein. However, although we said that they're both similar with respect to drisha and chakira, what are some of the differences between capital cases and monetary cases when it comes to judging them? So it says. Dinei Mamanos b'shlosha. The halacha we know is that Dinei Mamanos is adjudicated by a bezin of 3. Dinei Nefashos be'esim b'shlosha. However, a capital case is tried by a bezin of 23. We learned the first Mishnah in the Masechta learned that out from Psukim. And it learned it out. It says Eda. So you need 20. It derived that Eda means 10, and it says Eda. It says Eda twice, so therefore you need 20. Then it says that we need an extra 3 because we need to. It explains exactly how we need that. So that's where we learn out those halachas on Daf Beis Amud Beis. Now Dinei Mamanos, the halachas of Dinei Mamanos, posken bein l'schus bein l'chova. So when adjudicating a monetary case, we can begin the discussion, the deliberation, whether we want to begin with the side of non-liability, l'schus, to exempt from payment the defendant, bein lechova, or whether or not we want to make him liable. So you can open up the discussions in the court whether or not you were trying to make him liable or not make him liable. Any type of discussion regarding his liability you can open with. Dinei nefashos, however, in contrast with dinei nefashos, poschen l'schus, we always begin our discussions in a capital case trying to exonerate the defendant. Ve'ein posen l'chova, and the Gemara is going to explain exactly what that means. Ve'ein posen l'chova, and we will not begin our discussions in a negative tone where we're trying to find him guilty. Dinei mamanos, that's another distinction. Dinei mamanos, with respect to dinei mamanos, matin al pi echad. We know the halacha is generally when we have a basin, or we apply this halacha generally in other cases as well, that we go after the majority. So with Dinei Mamanos Matan al Pi Echad, all we need is a single majority figure to tilt the halacha. Bein l'schus, bein l'chova, whether that be in favor of the defendant or to find him liable. The Dinei Nefashos, however, with respect to Dinei Nefashos Matan al Pi Echad l'schus, if we want to find him not guilty, so we can then use a single majority. To find him not guilty, all we need is one person. However, to find him guilty, val pishnayim lechova. However, and the Gemara learned this out as well, we would require a 2-member majority of the Sanhedrin to find him guilty. That's why we need the bezin of 23. So therefore, you can have 10 plus an additional 2. So you'd have 12 against 12 against 10.
Yeah,
12 against 11.
Everyone voting,
What?
don't you?
You want
don't
what?
You have everyone voting?
You do have everyone voting, yeah.
So will it be a majority of 3 in practice because you have an odd number of judges?
What? I'm going to continue. Yeah. Okay. You have to have the ability to have so for chova to find him guilty, you need a majority of two of the at least 2 of the judges. Dine mamanos. With respect to dine mamos, another distinction. Again, the Mishnah is going to continue with the distinctions between the adjudication of monetary cases and capital cases. Dine mamanos machzirin ben l'schos ben l'chova. In a case of dine mamanos, the judges are allowed to retract the ruling, whether it be l'schos or change the ruling, I should say, ben l'schos ben l'chova, whether it be to find him liable or not liable. Dine nefashos, however, with respect to dine nefashos machzirin l'schos, we can change the psak for schos in favor of the defendant, meaning to find him not guilty. Ve'ein machzirin l'chov. However, once we paskin that he's guilty, we're not. I'm sorry. Right. By dine nefashos, we can change the ruling to find him liable. However, ve'ein machzirin l'chova. However, we will not change the ruling from not guilty to guilty. Right? Once we paskin that he's not guilty, we will no longer change it anymore to find him guilty. And that, by the way, a lot of the halachos by dine nefashos, by capital cases, have to do with the halacha. The pasuk says v'hitzila eda, that we should find any opportunity to save the person from death, or whatever the ruling is going to be, ostensibly death. We try to find any means in which to save him. So therefore, any opportunity we have to lock him in a certain sense, to not being killed, we do. So, dine mamanos hakom labdum schos. The halacha is by dine mamanos hakom labdum schos. Anyone in attendance, Rashi explains, even the Talmidim who are sitting in front of the Sanhedrin that haven't actually been selected as judges, so anyone is allowed to offer an opinion with respect to zechus or chova. Anyone's allowed to offer any reason to find him liable or not liable. Dine nefashos, however, with respect to dine nefashos, hakom lam zechus, anyone is allowed to offer an opinion or a reason or a some sort of 1 second. Yeah, hakom lam zechus. Anyone is allowed to offer an argument with respect to his finding him not guilty. However, we do not listen to anyone. We will only listen to judges when we are offering an argument to find him guilty. Dine mamanos, again, another distinction. A person who began with a line of reasoning to find him liable, can then flip and offer a line of questioning or a line of reasoning to find him not liable. Or vice versa. If he started out with a line of reasoning to find him not guilty, he can then find him. He would be allowed to then switch and find him liable. However, with respect to capital cases, if a person started with a line of questioning or reasoning or his argument with to find him guilty, Malamid Schus is would be allowed. Again, this is part of trying to find him not guilty. Would be allowed to then would switch his argument to find him not guilty. But once he begins his argument to find him not guilty, is not allowed to then switch his line of reasoning to find him guilty. Rashi there points out. Rashi, if you look at Rashi, a little bit across and a little bit to the right and a little bit down. Rashi says svarhi. It's really it's logical. Because as I said before, this is all dashed out of the pasuk of vitzilo, that we should find ways to find him not guilty. So Rashi says that what the Gemara later on is going to explain, that this is talking about the deliberation stage, not after there was a psak. Before, the Mishnah talked about if there's a psak, can you switch that psak? This is actually talking about the deliberation stage. B'shas matzah hudulo yachzer. During the time of deliberation, hudulo yachzer, he's not allowed to switch. Dimitoch she'ata omerlo, because we'll say to him shalo lachzer, that he's not allowed to switch his line of questioning. hu mechazer acharayis. He's going to go and search for different proofs to his to bolster his claim. He's making a claim that the person is not liable or not guilty. So if we lock him into that line of reasoning, he'll go ahead and search, try to find different reasons to support the claim, because we're not allowing him to switch. So he'll look after acharayis lahamed devarav to support his claim. V'shema yimtzarayis nechonos, and perhaps he'll find good supporting arguments. Avo b'shask mardin. However, once they reach a verdict, shekvar chazer achar kol tzadim, at the point in which they're ready to issue their verdict, and they've already gone through all the different questions and all the different reasons, right? V'nira lo she'ein devarav nechonim, and still he finds that he cannot still support his claim of innocence. At that point, he is obviously, we don't want people issuing erroneous rulings, so we will obviously allow him to change his halacha. However, during his questioning phase, we don't allow him to switch at that point. We try to have him find supporting information to support his claim of innocence. Okay. Dine Mamanos, the second to last short line. Dine Mamanos, Danin B'yom V'gomer B'layla. The halacha is that Dine Mamanos, you can begin the deliberation during the day, and you are allowed to V'gomer B'layla, and you're allowed to complete it at night. Dine Nefashos, however, conversely, Dine Nefashos, capital cases, Danin B'yom V'gomer B'yom. When you begin the deliberation during the day, and you complete it on a day as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be that day, but you complete it during the daytime as well. Dine Mamanos Gomer B'yom. Dine Mamanos are completed. You complete the case on that day. Bein l'schos, bein l'chova, whether it be finding him liable or not finding him liable. Dine nefashos, however, dine nefashos Gomer B'yom l'schos. With respect to schos, if you find him innocent, so you complete it as quickly as possible. We want him to go off free as quickly as possible. So you complete the case on that day. Uviyom however, with respect to a guilty verdict, b'yom shal acharav l'chova. Anytime there's going to be a guilty verdict. The verdict is issued the following day. We want to give the judges as much time as they need to possibly find a supporting argument to his innocence. So therefore, we will not complete it on that day. We will do it on the following day. And the Mishnah says, because of that, lefikach, because we have to wait an extra day in order to issue the verdict, and whatever the halacha is in terms of whether he's going to be put to death or not. Lefikach in danin lo be'erev Shabbos lo be'erev Yom Tov. Therefore, we cannot sit in judgment of a capital case on erev Shabbos or erev Yom Tov. Why? That will require us to issue a verdict on the following day, which would be Shabbos or Yom Tov. We can't kill anyone on Shabbos or Yom Tov, so therefore we would not be allowed to hold the case erev Shabbos or erev Yom Tov. Dine Mamanos, whether it be Dine Mamanos, Hatameos, and the Mishnah adds also adjudicating halachos of Tameos and Taras, determining whether something's Tameh or Tar. Maschilim min Hagadol. You begin, so the way a Beis structure was set up was, it was in a semicircle. The greatest of the judges sat in the center and was flanked, and as you reached the outer limits, the lowest ranking judge was sitting. And so the Mishnah says, with respect to dine mamanos, monetary cases, maschilim in agal, you would begin from the center, from the most important, highest ranking judge, and then you would work your way outward. And dine nefashos maschilim in atzad. However, with respect to capital cases, we would begin with the lowest ranking judge. The reason for this is, again, based on v'hitzilo ha'eda, that we don't want anyone's argument to be influenced by the primary judge. So therefore, we will begin with and if he issues his argument initially, so everyone's going to think, oh wow, that sounds interesting, and they're going to start offering supporting arguments possibly for his argument. So therefore, we start with the lowest ranking person, and then work our way back up to the highest ranking individual. Now, Hakok Sherem Ladin Dine Mamos. Everyone, even Rashi explains, even a mamzer is allowed to sit in judgment for a monetary case. However, not everyone is allowed to stand in judgment for a Dine Nefashos for capital cases. Ella, who do we use? Kohanim, Levi, and Yisraelim, Hamsin Lakuna. Any Kohen, Levi, or Yisrael who would be allowed, whose lineage would allow him to marry into, whose daughter would be allowed to marry into Shevet Kahuna, would be allowed to sit on a bezin for a capital case. Okay, that's the end of the Mishnah. The Mishnah is going to discuss some of these. The Gemara is now going to discuss some of these halachas. Starting from the Gemara, 5 lines down in the Gemara. Dinei mamanos. When with respect to so the Mishnah had said again that dinei mamanos also requires just as dinei nefashos requires the questioning of the edim, so also does dinei mamanos. Now the Gemara is going to ask, is that actually true? Dinei mamanos mipayin drusha v'chakira. Does dinei mamanos actually require us to question the edim? Again, there's the primary questions that establish the time and place and some of the facts, the general facts of the case, and then there's some supplementary questions. So does dinei nefashos actually require us to ask dinei mamanos? Does it actually require us to question the edim that way? Viraminu, I'll ask you a stira. Shtar shezmanu kasav be'echad b'nisan b'shmita. A shtar which has on it written that the loan occurred on the 1st of Nisan in the Shemitah year. Mar's going to explain later on why exactly we throw in Shemitah, but let's just take the case at face value. It just says, the shtar says that there was a certain amount of money lent from a malva to a love on the 1st of Nisan. Uvo Edim, and Edim came, va'amru, and they said, hey, so a second set of Edim came, and they said, hey, chatame Edim al shtar zeh, how are you, are the Edim signed in this document? How are you able to give testimony on this shtar? Valo b'yom ploni, imano yisam. You were the 1st of Nisan. We were out doing something. We were out together. There's no way that you had time to sign to witness this transaction. And that's a case of Edom Zomim. Edom Zomim, again, if we remember, there's 2 types. You can have a set of Edom that dispute the Edus of a first Edom. That's called just Edom Hamachishin, and they usually cancel each other out. They're just. And the second form is where Edom offer a ruling, and the second set of Edom, they don't offer any information about the case particularly, but they do say that it's impossible for the first set of Edom to witness this event because you were with us on that day, and then all the halachas of Hazama apply. So they said, the second set of Edom said, how could you give testimony on this case? You were with us on the 1st of Nisan. So the Gemara says, so the halacha is shtar kasher. The document is valid. The ediv ksherim, and the edim are valid as well. Why? Why is that true? Didn't they lie? So the Gemara says cheshinan shema ichuruhu v'kasvuhu. Perhaps the document was post-dated. Why? What happened? They witnessed the event prior to the 1st of Nisan. They then didn't have an opportunity to write it down and sign the document. Later on the 1st of Nisan, they had the opportunity to write it. This was a day they were spending with the other Edim. So at some point during that day, they wrote down the document, signed it, and didn't write the date of the actual transaction, just wrote that particular day. So that's what we're choshish for, and therefore we assume that we have presumption that the Edim are not lying; they're actually in fact telling the truth, and the actual date of the document is not necessarily so integral to the document itself. If it's predated, it would make a difference, but it's post-dated here. Fine. So Gemara says now, now if it's true that we question the Edim with respect to the time and date, all the different facts about the transaction, if that's important, if that's part of the process of monetary cases, how's it possible for us to say that the Edim were not sure or weren't careful about the date? That's a very important part, and Bezin would actually ask them about that. And that would be important. If they wouldn't be able to verify that, then the whole document wouldn't start. So it's impossible for us to say, how could we say that maybe they didn't write it on the right day? That's a very important part of the Drisha V'Chakira process, and therefore Edim wouldn't mistakenly write the wrong date. And if had they done that, Bezdin would have questioned them. When you go to authorize the shtar, Bezdin would question them about that, and it would come out that that's the wrong date. So we shouldn't just say that. We shouldn't have this chashash that perhaps they wrote it on a different day. If you wanted to say that we actually do require questioning of the edim, specifically about the events and all that information, the time, place, all that about the event, so then how is it possible that we would be concerned that they just post-dated the shtar? So Gemara says, and if that's your question, according to your line of reasoning, tikshi lach mas nisin. You don't have to ask from a brisa. I'll give you a direct Mishnah that you can ask a similar question from. What's the Mishnah? And the Mishnah is, again, going to be stronger than the brisa. It's more authoritative than the brisa. So the Mishnah says, shtarei chov hamukdamin. If we have a shtar chov, a star of liability, hamukdamin, right? Hamukdamin, if it's predated psulin. We know that a shtar chov, right? A document that says you owe someone else money, if it's predated, the problem is that the shtar allows the certificate holder to collect from encumbered properties, and if he predates it and he sold fields to someone in the interim between the date of the shtar and when the actual loan took place, he'd be the certificate holder would be allowed to collect from fields that were not necessarily encumbered by the certificate. Fine. So shtar chov hamukdamim psulin. A shtar chov that is mukdam, that is predated, is possible. Hamucharin. However, it's postdated. It's ksher. This is a similar case to what we just said. If you write the date a later date, so therefore you're ceding essentially the authority to collect from fields. You could have collected from fields earlier, but you're changing the date to later on. But nevertheless, if you have a shtar and you write the date later, it's kosher. Now, it's the same question. If it's important for us to know exactly through the edim when exactly this loan occurred, so then how is it possible to allow one to have a shtar me'ucher? It shouldn't work. So it says we should not allow a shtar me'ucher, again, because that's important for us to. The reason why it's important is that let me back up. I didn't explain this earlier, but the reason why it's important for us to ask questions to the edim is to establish the basis for which we would be allowed to create them to make them edim zomim. We ask them questions to establish a baseline so that other edim can now say, you edim define your testimony as happening on this day, this time, this place. Now edim, any edus has to be subject to edim zomim. People should be another set of edim have to be allowed to come in and question the authority of those initial edim. So we have to establish the baseline by asking them very specific questions. So again, if these questions are important to the process of edim in a monetary case, so then we should never allow a shtar me'ucha. We should never allow a date to not be the proper date in a shtar. So Gemara says no. So Gemara asks a question from a brisa, then asks a stronger question from a mishnah. So Gemara says no. It's not a stronger question. Halokasha, that your question from the Mishnah is not in fact stronger. Our question from the Brisa was in fact a stronger question. Why? Now we get back to why we said it was in the first of Nisan on a Shemitah. Even on the first of Nisan on a Shemitah year, because it's not normal for a person to post-date a shtar in Shemitah. Shemitah itself, once the Shemitah year is over, or during the Shemitah year, at some point, all loans are canceled. So a person would want to give himself the greatest window to collect his loan. So a person's not. We would think that a person would not post date a shtar during the Shemitah year. He's shortening the window of collection. So you would have thought maybe that we wouldn't assume that a person perhaps post-dated the shtar during the Shemitah year, when a person would not post-date it, because we would not, where we wouldn't say that a person post-dated it, because he's essentially hurting, right? He's hurting his ability to collect. Nevertheless, given the shvius. So for Mr. Metzes, so the additional chiddush is no. We will say that even during a Shemitah year, because he still will have time. Why? Because the cancellation of the loan only occurs at the end of the year. So even if let's say he begins the loan is actually taken out in the beginning of the year, and he post-dates it to 6 months later in Nisan, he still has another 6 months until the end of the year to go ahead and collect. So we will still offer that chashash and say perhaps when he wrote it on the 1st of Nisan, it didn't occur on the 1st of Nisan, it actually occurred earlier. The Edim post-dated it, and therefore, it's fine. Therefore, we will say that the shtar is kosher and the Edim are kosher. Fine. So Gemara nevertheless is left with and that's how the Gemara resolves the question, why the question from the Brisa is in fact a stronger question. A long-winded way of saying, we started out the Mishnah saying that Dinei Nefashos, Dinei Mamanos require Drisha and Chakira, require the questioning of the Edim. The Gemara just proved from a Brisa and from a Mishnah that we do not. we allow the date is not really so important. As long as it's not predated, it's not so important to the authenticity of the shtar. So Gemara says Mikol Makom Kasha. So we're left with the question: do we require Drisha and Chakira by Dinei Mamonos, or do we not? So Gemara is going to now offer 3 or 4 different answers from different Amaram. So Amar of Chanina. Chanina says, Dvar Torah, the halacha mida oraisa, on a biblical level, echad dinei mamonos, ve'echad dinei nefashos, b'drisha v'chakira. As we saw from the pasuk, it says, mishpat echad yiheh lachem, sorry. It says that there's one law with respect to dinei mamonos and dinei nefashos, and we know by dinei nefashos it says, v'darashta v'chakarta, right? It says that you have to check out the edim. So therefore, we apply that to both dinei mamonos and dinei nefashos, based on mishpat echad. Shenemar, mishpat echad yiheh lachem. Fine. So minat Torah, we do require Drisha and Chakira. We do require questioning the Eidim. Umatam Amru, and why did the Chachamim say? Why midrabanan do we say that you do not require Drisha and Chakira, the questioning of the Eidim by Dinei Mamonos? Because Dinei Mamonos, Umatam Dinei Mamonos Lo B'Inin Drisha and Chakira. Why don't we require it? We see from these Mishnayos and the Brisa that we don't require it. So why don't we require it on a rabbinic level? Again, the Chachamim are in monetary cases have a lot of latitude because of the halacha of hefker, bezin hefker. Bezin essentially control everyone's money, so therefore Bezin is allowed to, in cases where they find it necessary, to change the ruling or to dispute it, to veer from the halacha, the deraisa, the biblical law, and change it for whatever reasons they find fit. So the Gemara says over here, why did the Chachamim find it necessary in the case of Drisha and Chakira with respect to questioning the Eidim to change the halacha? Kedei shelo tinol delas bifnei lavin. They didn't. Again, the Jewish market for loaning money is not a hot market. You're not making money, right? A person's not charging interest, so therefore people are essentially loaning money without getting interest back. So it's not a popular market. So we want to allow every opportunity or incentivize people or remove any impediment that which would cause people to not want to loan money. If we make it more difficult for them to loan money, again by requiring Eidim to be questioned, it'll be harder to find Eidim. The whole process becomes more strenuous. So therefore, they said, you know what? We're going to forgo this halacha. We're not going to require you to question Eidim, thereby making the loan a little bit more simple. So therefore, Kedei shelo tinol delas b'fnei lavin. So we didn't want to close the door in front of the borrowers. So therefore, they lifted this halacha. Elamayata, the Gemara asks, Ta'u lo yishalmu. The halacha is that if Bezdin, typically if Bezdin offers a verdict and they find later the verdict to be a mistaken verdict, so some of that the liability in certain cases falls upon the Bezdin to restore the. So let's say they ruled against the loan, the malveh. So they would restore the money to the malveh themselves from their own funds. So Gemara says, "Tohu lo yishalmu." Now Rashi, if you look at the first Rashi says, "Tohu bezin b'dinei mamonos." If bezin make a mistake in the monetary case, lo yishalmu, they shouldn't have to pay from their fund. The Dilma, why? They'll offer the following argument: Ishafkas luhu lidros v'lachkar. Had you given us the opportunity to properly vet the Eidim, we would have had more time. We would have been able to deliberate more properly because we would have had questioned the Eidim how we're typically accustomed to question the Eidim, and we wouldn't have made a mistake. Our mistake, they're blaming their mistake perhaps on the fact that they were not able to question the Eidim properly. So therefore, they would be able to exempt themselves from having to pay. So Gemara asks, if you don't require them it's essentially what you're offering the opportunity you're making it easier for people to loan money, but you're making it harder on the flip side for the dayanim to exempt themselves. Well, they're going to make the claim that had they been able it's actually harder on the malva. You're trying to make it easier on the lova, but you're also making it harder on the malva now, because now the malva will not be able to go back to Bezin and say, why don't you pay me? And Bezin will say, well, listen, we didn't have the opportunity to vet the Eidim. So Gemara says, no. Kol shekain shetinol delas b'fnei lavin. No, if we required that far, we wouldn't go. Why? Because if we would allow, not only would we allow the Eidim to not be checked out, but we would also allow Bezin to not pay, then people are not going to lend money anymore. They're not going to say, if Bezin's not going to back me anymore, if Bezin can make a claim and pater themselves, right? If Beis Din can make a claim and say we didn't have the opportunity to check the eidim, and therefore we're not liable, people are certainly not going to lend money in that case. So therefore, they went as far as to not require you to question the eidim, but they still made Beis Din liable if Beis Din made a mistake. Okay, so that's one answer. So basically, the first distinction is biblical and rabbinic. So Mida Oraisa, we do check out the eidim. Mida Rabbanan, this is the basic distinction. Mida Rabbanan, on a D'Rabbanan level, based on Shalotin Delos Miflei Lavin, we said that we do not have to question the eidim. That's one answer. Its next answer is Rava Amar. Rava says Masnisin Dahacha B'Dinei Knasos. No, he makes a distinction within Dinei Mamonos itself. He says that and not a Daraisa D'Rabbanan. He says really they're both. It's all Midrabbanan. He says B'Dinei Knasos with respect to Hacha B'Dinei Knasos v'idach behodos v'havos. Look at Rashi for a second. Rava Amar, the third line in Rashi. Tarvayu basar takanta d'Rabbanan. All of both the Mishnah and the Brisa were both discussing the D'Rabbanan. On the D'Rabbanan level, again, Midaraisa, you always need to check out the Eidim. Midarabanan, we said you don't. But we just said that the reason was because of what? Shalotin Delos Miflei Lavin. With respect to people, we want to incentivize people. We don't want to prevent people from loaning money anymore. That would only be with respect to cases in which there are loans involved. So that has to do with hodah, transfer of money with respect to an admission, or transfer of money with respect to a halva. Back to the Gemara again, I'm sorry. So with respect to hodah and halva, so we have that concern of that we don't want you to not loan money anymore. Knasos, regular knasos like Dalet V'Hei or Kefel, when they're deliberating those halachos, there's no concern of ensuring that people are still going to loan money anymore. So therefore, it's not necessary for us to say in that case that you don't have to question the eidim. Ostensibly, the ones that don't give this answer are going to say that once they made a decision by Dinei Mamonos not to require the questioning of eidim because of loans, we want to incentivize loans, that went across the board even to cases of knasos. They didn't distinguish between different types of dinei mamonos. It went across the board to all cases of dinei mamonos that you don't require. And nevertheless, Rav Papa's distinction now is between knasos and hodos. Within dinei mamonos, there are two different forms of judgments. Rav Papa Amar, another answer. Rav Papa says idi v'idi behoda v'halva. Both cases, no. We're talking about cases of loans. Now, in cases of loans, what is the distinction going to be between the Mishnah, which requires us to check out the Eidim, and the Brisa and Mishnah that do not require us? So he says, Kan bidin meruma, kan bidin she'ena meruma. So it has to do with whether or not the judges suspect that there's something untoward happening in this case. Rashi says meruma, shebeis din, right across. Rashi says, shebeis din makirin betovei azeh shuhurama. They either recognize that the person, one of the litigants, is actually they've encountered him in other scenarios in which he's found to be to be a liar or some sort of trying to trick them in some way. Oh, mivinin tainas ramai b'davar, or somehow they don't know him personally, but they can sense from his line of reasoning, from his argument, from the way he presented his case, that something is happening that is not correct. And therefore, in that particular... So again, the distinction will be, generally, in the ordinary course, we wouldn't question the Eidim. Right? We would not question the Eidim. However, there are certain scenarios in which they sense that something is happening over here in this case, that something is not correct in this case, something deceitful is happening in this case, and in that scenario, they would question the Eidim. That's the distinction that we make. Kid Reish Lakish, and he's going to prove it from a pasuk. Kid Reish Lakish, like Reish Lakish learns out from the pasuk. The Reish Lakish Rami Ksiv. Reish Lakish had the following stira and psukim. There's two different psukim. It says b'tzedek tishbot amisecha, judge your friend with righteousness. Uksiv, and it says in Shoftim tzedek tirdov. It says tzedek twice. Surely run after justice. Why does the pasuk use two different variations of the same halacha? Haketza, how's this possible? Kan b'din meruma, kan b'din she'ein meruma. There's a standard form of tzedek, of justice, and then there's an added level of justice. So the added level of justice is necessary in a case where they sense that something is happening that is meruma, is deceitful. So that's the tzedek, the additional tzedek, certainly go after justice, where they would have to go ahead and question the Eidim. It's an additional layer of justice. Rav Ashi now is going to come and explain the variation in the psukim a little bit differently, not necessarily to go ahead and answer the Mishnah. Rav Ashi Amar Masnisin Kiddushanina. The answer for the Mishnah, we already have answers. We already gave a few answers. From Chanina, we gave an answer from Rava, we gave an answer from Rav Papa. We have an answer for the Mishnah. Let's go with one of those answers. But what is going to be the distinction between the pasuk? So he says, Rav Ashi Amar Masnisin Kiddushanina. Kroi. What about the psukim? How do we understand the pasuk? One says tzedek tishmana misecha and tzedek tirdof. Kroi echad l'din ve'echad l'pshara. One is talking about the strict justice. However, tzedek, an additional layer of justice, that's referring to pshara, to compromise, which is actually built into the fabric of the justice system, where even though it's not necessarily offering by the strict letter of the law is not necessarily the right ruling, but is a course where Bezdin can choose or should choose in certain scenarios to compromise between the two parties. Kidditanya, how do we know this? We had the following brayso: tzedek tirdof. If the pasuk says tzedek surely run after justice, echad ledin ve'echad lepshara, whether it be one is for standard justice, ve'echad lepshara, and one is for compromise. Ketzad, what is this scenario? So it says, Shtei svinos ovros benar. You have two boats crossing or passing a narrow strait. Upagu zebazeh, and they reach each other, and they're both going in opposite directions, and there's no place for either one directly to pass. They're both in each other's way. Im ovros shteyem tovos. If they try, it's so narrow that if they both try and pass each other, then someone is going to drown, or both of them are going to drown. However, if they go one after the other, then they will be able to pass. If one either pulls aside or waits for the other one, they will both be able to pass. Similarly, two camels or two caravans that are going up opposite sides of a mountain. It's again at the top, at the peak, it was very narrow. I think even going up, it was very narrow. At the top, the climax of the mountain, they both reach each other, and there's not enough room for them to pass. Im alu shneim, if they both go ahead and try and pass each other, right? Shneim noflim, noflim. It's like going down Shelburne in the morning. It's like trying to avoid the cars. Sorry, try and park. Now, so he says, if they both try and pass, shneim noflim, they'll both fall off the mountain. However, if they wait, if one retreats back to a safe spot where he's able to then allow the other to come down the mountain, shneim olam, then both of them will be able to ultimately ascend and cross over the mountain. So now, haketzat. So what should you do? What should you do in that case? Te'una. How do you make that distinct? Who goes first? So haketzat te'una v'she'ena tuna tidka she'ena tuna v'pnei te'una. So if one is carrying a load and one is not carrying a load, so obviously the one that's carrying the load is going to go first. Krova v'she'ena krova. If the distance from the starting point is closer to one, meaning if one has been on the journey for a shorter period of time, one has been on the journey for the longer period of time, so the one who's been traveling for longer will go first. So tivche krova mishe'ena krova. The one who's closer to his origin will go second. He will be pushed aside in the face of the one who is coming from a greater distance. Hayishtem krovos, shtem rechokos. What if they're both? Everything's the same. Everything's equidistant. Hayishtem krovos, shtem rechokos. Hata pshara b'neim. So they'll reach some sort of compromise. Umalos schar zulazu. And somehow, one will allow the other to go first, and will compensate whichever allows the other to go first, and will have to retreat and come back up the mountain. He will then be compensated from the other party somehow because of his time, whether it be just his time waited or the fact that he has to go down the mountain and go back up the mountain. So that's the pshara, that's the compromise that we're talking about. Fine. That's the Gemara, is just an illustration of the pshara. Taner Rabbanan. The Gemara is going to talk about the pasuk again. Tzedek tirdof. So it says, what does it mean, tzedek? You should certainly follow justice. Holech achar bezdin yafi. You should go after a proper bezdin. Achar Rabbi Eliezer Lud, go after Rabbi Eliezer to Lud. Achar Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai leVarchaya, and go after Rabbi Yochanan, and go if you can seek the bezdin of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai in Barchaya. Tana Kol Rechaim beborni. The Gemara is going to discuss something about Barchaya. Tana Kol Rechaim beborni. If you hear the mill, the sound of a mill in Borni, Shavua haben. They weren't allowed to have open circumcisions, so they would run the mill, which would be an indication that there's a bris happening. It's like an announcement. Or haner, if you saw b'bror chayil, if you saw the light of a candle in bror chayil, mishneh sham. It's either a wedding feast or a bris. And Tosfos discusses that's where there's some customs to have a candles either by a bris or by a wedding, possibly coming from this scenario. Tonarbana tzedek tirdov halo. This is similar to what we just said before. Holech achar chachamim liyeshiva. You should go after the chachamim to the yeshiva to find a court. That's where they had the courts. Achar Eliezer Lud, after Eliezer to Lud. Achar Yochanan ben Zakkai to Bar Chayil, after Yochanan ben Zakkai to Bar Chayil. Achar Bishua lePekian to Rabbi Shua and Pekian. This is where the yeshivas of all these people were. Achar ben Gamliel Yavne, after Rabbi Gamliel to Yavne. Achar Bekiva leBnei Brak, after Bekiva to Bnei Brak. Achar Rabbi Masya leRomi, after Rabbi Masya to Romi. Achar Bechanani ben Tradia leSichni. Achar Rabbi Yossi l'Tzipuri, after Rabbi Yossi to Tzipuri. Achar Rabbi Yehuda ben Beser l'Nitzivin. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beser was in Nitzivin. Achar, the Hagra changes this to not Rabbi Shua because we had Rabbi Shua before, but he changes it to Chanina ben Achi Rabbi Shua. Lagola to Golas and Pumpadisa. Achar Rebbe leBeis Sharim, after Rebbe to Beis Sharim. Achar Chachamim l'Lishkas Hagazis, after the Chachamim to the Lishkas Hagazis where they resided in the temple area. Now, that's that. Dine Mamanos Poslan. So we said before that Dine Mamanos we start with deliberating in defense of the I'm sorry. Dine Mamanos we would start Bein Lechova, Bein L'schos, Bein Lechova, and Dine Nefashos we would start only L'schos. So it says, what does it mean we would start only L'schos? We would only start deliberating a non-guilty verdict. Hey Chamrin, what do we say to them? Amar Yehuda, Ha Chamrin. This is what we say. Mi Yemar Kidam Riso. Is it actually? They say to the Edom the following. Is it actually true what you're saying? Do you think you're right? So Gemara says, what do you mean? They essentially challenge the Edom outright. The Bezin does. Gemara, Amar le'ula v'ha chasminalu. What are you're scaring them? You're going to scare off the Edom. They're going to retract. They're trying to offer testimony. You're just going to say, is there any truth to what you're saying? V'ha chasminalu. You're going to force them to retract from their statement. So Gemara says, so what? What's wrong? You can intimidate them. Milo Tanya, did we not learn in the Brayser? B'Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Messian as Edom Makan L'Mokan. B'Shimon ben Elazar says that we transfer the Edom from place to place. Why? Because we want them to, again, we want to get a not guilty verdict. So therefore, we transfer the Edom from place to place, giving them perhaps time to reconsider their argument. So we see that we do want them to reconsider. So Gemara says, no, midami, is that similar? Hasam and Mela Kamitri. They're the ones who are retracting. You're not telling them to retract. Here you're actively trying to get them to change the course of their reasoning. So Gemara says, Allah Amar Ula, so what do we say? That can't be what we say to them. Allah Amar Ula, Hachi Amrilin. This is what we say to them. Yesh L'cha Edim Lazimam. Guys, do we have any contradicting Edom? Are there any Edom around that can be mazan, that can make these Edom into Edom zomim? The Gemara says, Amar li Rabba, v'chi poslan b'schusa shazeh, shi chovasa shazeh. It's a zechus. What you're offering is support for the defendant, but you're trying to make these Edom into zomim. So it's actually the zechus, the opportunity for the defendant, it ends up being a liability for the Edom themselves. So even though you're trying to be lenient towards one, you're being strict towards the Edom themselves. You're trying to make them into Edom Zomim, so that's not possible. Umi havi chovaso, is it actually a chova? Is it actually a liability for the Edom Zomim? Vatanan, but we learned in the following Mishnah, Ein Edom Zomim neragin, we don't kill Edom Zomim, ad shen yigmar adin. The halacha is that if just because Edom offer an argument and are found to be Zomimim, they only become Zomimim if the verdict was actually found in favor of their argument. So just because if we question them and try to look for Edom Zomim in the deliberation stage, it's not going to force them. They'll be knocked off, but they will not become Edom Zomim. So Gemara says, Hachi Amina. So this is what I meant to say. This is what I meant my question to be, if that was our question. If you asked, are they Zomimim, this is the following. The following is the problem. Ilu Shasik, let's say we ask for Zomimim, and a person doesn't present the Zomimim right away, and we wait to issue the verdict, and then we go, because of the instructions of Bezin, when I had to find Zomimim, Ilu Shasik, had we waited, Ad Migmar Dine, until the din was actually administered, Umaisi Edim, Mumazim Luhu, and then we'll bring Edim to be mazim, to create the first Edim into Edim Zomim, Havi Lechavasa Shazeh. It will be, again, a liability towards the Edim, so that cannot be how we start out our argument, our judgment. Elo Amar Rabba, Rabba says the following: Amrina lei yesh lecha edim lakhishan. Do we have edim not that are making them to zomim, but alternate sets of edim that are going to offer a different opinion for the case? Rav Kana Amar, Rav Kahana says we say the following: Midarechem nizdake plone. They just start in a positive way. They say, from your words, it seems like the defendant is going to be found. Not that they're saying that what you said is necessarily a support of him not being guilty, but from your words, we seem to be able to be found. We think we'll be able to find him not guilty. Abai and Rava say Amri Tavayo, Amri Le Iloka Talt Lo Titcha. They say no. They speak directly to the defendant. They say if you didn't kill anyone, you have nothing to worry about. Rav Ashi Amar Kol Mi Sheyodei Lo Zchus Yava V'Yalamed Olav. This is how they begin their adjudication. Anyone who has a zchus. Is there anyone around that has something positive to say about the defendant? Come forward and say it. Tanekava say the Rabbi Rava. We have a brayso that supports Abai and Rava. Why? Rabbi says, we say to the Sota, the Kohen says to the Sota, Im lo shachav ishosach, v'im lo satis. He starts out in the positive. If nothing happened to you, if you in fact are not guilty, don't worry about drinking from the waters. They're going to give you a great bracha. And only then does he go into what the negative effects of the Sota waters. Mikan, the top of Lama Gimel, sheposchem b'dinei nefashos tchila l'schos. You see from the Sota itself, we derive from the Sota that we begin positively, and only then do we turn to the more negative discussion.